here in London. Thank you for joining us for today's Siemens Global webinar. Today's topic will be looking at strategies to streamline product innovation with best product requirement management tools. Delighted to welcome as your speaker today, Mr. Mark Sampson. He has a very distinguished CV. We've just picked out some of it here. I'll just go through a couple of highlights and then we'll get things underway. Mark is the product evangelist, preaching integrating systems, engineering and requirements within the PLM business here at Siemens. He's also the co-chair of the INCOS and the MBSC initiative, where he's involved with helping to transform engineering culture. As a result, he is a much sought-after speaker in terms of his implementations of this topic. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome as your speaker today, Mr. Mark Thompson. Okay, Mark, I've just unmuted you. I've passed you the ball. If you'd please like to go ahead and share.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how do we achieve some greater product innovation in your business by leveraging integrated requirements in Siemens PLM software. So we're having this conversation because regardless of whatever you build, whatever industry you're in, there's this common trend that's impacting every product development effort. And that has to do with the fact that we're getting much more complex with the combination of electrical, mechanical, software components, and because we're increasing the complexity without keeping up with our processes, we find that a number of things are going wrong. We have these schedule delays going on with poor market acceptance, where our design teams can't find or reuse the right design information when they need it. There's this tedious design review process that takes place after the design essentially is in process rather than forward-looking, and that's when we discover lots of issues. We have this problem that when we finally get through the design, there's this transition that takes place into manufacturing, and we discover lots of issues with bombs and other things. Plus, we have this slow and error-prone kind of change management process that fails to account for all the cross-domain impacts, since the tools you use to do this are really cross-domain, since the fact that we have these multi-domain or cross-domain kinds of products. So if you're seeing these kinds of issues in your business, we would propose it's time to rethink your approach and start to work towards this challenge of becoming a digital enterprise. So we're not suggesting, of course, that you just revolutionize your product development efforts overnight. What we're offering you is a journey or a roadmap to help you take on these first steps on your journey to become digitalized. Now at Siemens, we can help you with this process with our fully integrated approach to engineering process management. Now the collaborative product development across systems, across domains, across your departments can help you accelerate your product innovation, can improve your product quality, and streamline the handoff from engineering to manufacturing, making everything much better, much faster. Now we have these solutions to help you that essentially ensure compliance by connecting the requirements into the development process as a critical first step in defining what it is the customer will buy, how you know you've arrived, how you know you have a quality product, and so forth. Essentially is the definition of requirements. What we're doing here is getting that to the point where it's integrated with the product lifecycle so we can support this cross-domain design management in the context of these requirements through the integration of tools and data and processes to find, share, and reuse all this information. Of course, we need to define and share a complete understanding of our product. That includes all the variants and other aspects of this so you can transition easily into manufacturing. And of course, what we're after doing is eliminating these late-stage discoveries that cause us to have to do rework. And we're after, of course, visually collaborating around this product as much as we can using what you've been hearing about as far as the digital twin. Of course, all this reduces your delays and improves your quality and your configurable, it creates this configurable closed-loop change process. And it begins, of course, with taking control of your requirements. That's why we're talking about it here. There will be other webinars on the topics as we go along here. And, of course, what we're after doing is connecting these requirements into the product development process. So we have this opportunity to influence design as it's happening with the daily design decisions. That creates this requirement-driven design environment for continuous integration. So now in today's webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to take a closer look at the role of requirements in this collaborative product development process. Requirements, of course, are important because they're carrying the voice of the customer. What we want to do is get them connected into the product lifecycle so that every decision maker and every decision that's made along the process of doing your product development is influenced by the requirements so people can make the right decisions. And essentially what it does is it predisposes your products to be compliant with the requirements. So given the typical engineering process environments, we see lots of problems going on here. So for example, there's this poor cross-domain understanding. Collaboration is difficult. Coordination and planning of the product development activities begins to get fragmented. And so we have this fragmented requirement validation process that takes place because the requirement management is separated from the validation of the requirements by both time and space and organizations. And of course, we have difficulty tracking changes to the requirements or the changes to the design that are affecting requirements. So in your organizations, you can think about times where, for example, a requirement has changed and the downstream development disciplines were not informed, or when a downstream development issue came up and it wasn't communicated back to the requirements, and we don't discover these problems until late in the life cycle, which of course leads to this redesign effort. That's why it's easy to understand why research, this quote here from ARMR Research, which indicates that more than 50% of all product introductions fail, and they blame it on failing to meet the customer requirements. So if you want proof, there are lots of failures around. You can see it in the news almost every day. And it's because we live in this world of disconnected or disintegrated compliance. Looking here at a couple of these headlines, you're familiar with some of them, and some of them are company killers. Many of them and many of these recent product recalls are making the news are because of failed requirements or requirements that were lost along the way or not communicated. And the result is, of course, in non-compliant products, which can be pretty serious when we talk about recalls and injuries, for example. And many of these organizations, of course, as you look at this list, manage requirements. I could go into any one of them and probably find a requirement database or Excel spreadsheet or document. The problem is the requirements are disconnected from the product lifecycle so that they don't have the opportunity or the ability to influence your design process towards compliance. So this is a lot like in most organizations, they do indeed match requirements in some disconnected way. Like, for example, the most common used requirement tool is an Excel spreadsheet, Word documents, and sort of standalone or isolated requirement tools, could just name a few. The problem is that because they're disconnected from the rest of the world, the rest of the product lifecycle, they don't have any power to influence the design towards compliance except during these periodic design reviews that are part of your product development processes. If you miss it there, then you've missed the opportunity. And as a result, when something changes either on the requirement side or on the design side, you don't see the impact or the connection, which means you end up in the wrong place as you're no longer compliant. This is like the difference between navigating with a compass and taking periodic sightings, like in your periodic design reviews, and an integrated GPS capability that you all have on your phones and you use every day that are always checking where you are. So it's the difference between the zigzag course and an optimized, continuously updated course. And of course, it gets worse because in this day and age, the customers are always changing their mind. So when you finally do arrive at what you thought was the original target with our compass, the customer or competition have changed the destination. So here's a trick question: which path is longer as you look at this? Of course, this integrated requirements is after solving this problem by keeping the project tracking towards the customer needs, even as they change, to this integrated requirements, even as the customer changes his mind, to make sure you start compliant and you stay compliant. That enables this idea of the ability for you to start integrated and stay integrated as you work through the product development process. So with Teamcenter, we enable you to capture these requirements easily, to secure them and manage them, to accurately verify them, and rely and maintain on the reliably maintain these requirement information as you go through this process. So as you look at the big picture here, the process that you would go through, as I said earlier, it's just not about managing requirements. Once you get them captured, they got to go somewhere. And oftentimes we forget that the reason we're keeping up the requirements isn't just to manage them, it's just to influence design. That's what we care about. So Teamcenter, what it does is it connects these requirements with your product development people and processes to achieve those requirements, and it creates this requirement-driven product development process. Now, your overall engineering process management strategy can include requirements management and provide the engineering decision makers with the downstream stakeholders with a common understanding of the product and what they need to create. This is an important aspect about requirements. They're really the only language that everybody in an organization should be speaking, because each of the various domains have their own unique vocabulary, as you're probably aware. Requirements bridge these gaps between the domains, and that's an important aspect for you to achieve your overall product goals. Now, of course, you can capture, share, and maintain these requirements in a centralized location, helping you to ensure that everyone in an organization across the supply chain has access to the latest and most accurate information. So not only are you involved with requirements within your own organization as far as your internal company, but your suppliers can participate in this as well, and they can be influenced by the requirements as they're being updated and so forth. And with the requirements managed alongside the rest of your product data, that means you can now tie these product requirements to the implementation. So by allocating these requirements to the various downstream or multi-domain design and analysis function, you can actually ensure that the implementation is always in line with the requirements, as well as ensure that, of course, that you have the resources being spent on the highest priority projects and be able to mitigate these risks before they become serious problems. So this centralized source of requirements is in Teamcenter. It's linked, has the ability to be linked to implementation to help you verify the design needs of the requirements itself. Now, this has to do with the fact that one of the definitions of a good requirement is it's verifiable. And so, of course, what we want to do is tie the requirements to how they're going to be verified. And, of course, what would be great and what would be best would be the ability for you to verify as you move along in this development process, to have this continuous verification process rather than discover late in the development process that you've got a problem. So we're talking about, in this case, tying the requirements to the validation, verification, the QA part of the problem, so they can see what's coming and you can see what's happening in the downstream development process. We actually had an experience with one telecommunications company that had some 60,000 test cases involved in validating a set of requirements, and we compared the requirements against the test cases that was used to validate, and we found a large disconnect. Almost a third of the requirements weren't being validated by anything, and almost half of the test cases weren't tied to any requirements, and so they were overdoing their testing as we went along. So with that, I'd like to step into a little demonstration for you to describe how this integrated requirement process will work. So you're looking today here at a web browser. I'm merely pointing my web browser at the Teamcenter. This is what we refer to as active workspace. In this case, if I were going to go in and start a new project, for example, for a new hand drill, I'm going to go look for the specs or the existing requirements so I can start there. And what I have the ability to do here is to search and filter to make it easy to find what I'm looking for. So rather than looking into the entire database, I'm only looking for specific information, and this allows you to filter down to a specifically kind of information you're interested in. So using this, I'm going to jump over into the new consumer hand drill project that I'm about to undertake. Now, as I step into this, you can see I have a structure of requirements. This is equivalent to your bill of materials type of structures that are used throughout your project, product structures, functional structures, process structures, and so forth. This is a requirement structure that's now available to you. And I'll point out to you that these requirements that you see here are first-class objects, just like anything else in Teamcenter. Now, that means it's subject to all the variation, change, so forth and so on as you work here. So what I'm going to do in this process, I'm going to go create some new requirements for this new project. Oh, before I go there, I'll point out to you that you can see here that as I select on this, I can look at this in a documentation or a specification type view. This looks familiar to you because it'll look just like your existing specifications. The difference here is each of these paragraphs, if you will, are individual requirements, and those individual requirements have their own individual life cycles. So you can change, for example, a particular requirement and have it participate in various versions of the spec and so forth. So now that I've got this, I'm going to go ahead and add some requirements here. Now you notice when I do this, it creates this object in the structure of requirements. This new requirement is being placed there. This is asking that we have a cheaper processor in this specification. Now, of course, there's many different kinds of requirements that you're going to want to create. Now, this could also, of course, have been imported directly from external sources like standards, RIF standards, or Word documents, those kinds of things. I could also, of course, have created and manipulated these requirements directly from standard Office products like Excel and Word, for example. Now, each of these individual requirements can have a different behavior based on the type. So, for example, electrical requirements or performance requirements or safety requirements can have different rules, different variation, so forth. So now as we've got this, the important here, as I pointed out earlier, is the fact that what we care about with requirements isn't necessarily just the requirements themselves, but where they go. So what we're after doing is, you'll notice that as I scrolled down through this, you saw these link indicators. And you have the ability, via drag and drop and otherwise, to be able to look at the trace relationships that go place. There's a special tab if you want to get some more details here, but as you look at this, you can see that the selected requirement for longer battery life traces to a motor, a complete gearbox, a machine housing, and of course it can go to other things, like for example, we can go to project schedules or tasks, can go to manufacturing processes, can go to warranty issues, can go to all those other kinds of objects that exist inside a Teamcenter and are used to manage the entire product lifecycle. Now, I could have edited these requirements either directly in either the spec view or in the property view. And of course, what I'm going to do now that I've got all my requirements gathered is you'll notice I'm about to start a standard change process. Now, this is a standard change capability that's part of the PLM systems, in particular Teamcenter in this case, but you can now see how these requirements, if I gathered up all the changes for parts, products, or whatever, the requirements would actually participate in that process as well. So that's what you're about to see here, is it's going to launch into a change practice or a change process. And now that I've gone, it's going to go out and do its thing. Now, of course, this is all in the context of a web browser that has Teamcenter behind it. It gives you the scalability and the security you need to pull off any size project. You may have some questions about that. I'd be glad to answer when we get towards the end of the day here, or the end of the meeting. So with that, there are some people who are already, organizations are already using this. Here's a quote from ZKW, which is an automotive supplier that developed the first adaptive cornering lights, did it for motorcycles, and it includes active roll and pitch angle as well. Teamcenter requirements was used to facilitate the smarter decision-making process that they have, and they claim that they've seen consistent traceability of all their changes. It's accelerated the change process of execution, and changes, of course, are scalable and extendable, and they have a complete history, of course, that's maintained here. And, of course, they have trustworthy, what they call trustworthy specifications that are produced out of this environment. Because as you know, anytime you print something, you know it's not accurate or not up to date. This way they produce accurate by design or accurate by design specifications. So now let's take a little closer look at some of the key capabilities here, just to summarize for you. There's really 4 key areas for you to worry about as far as capture and leveraging the voice of the customer in Teamcenter requirements. One, of course, is you got to get the requirements captured using a variety of tools, including, and then once you get them captured, you want to maintain and manage and share them. And of course, this is all coming from a single secure source that's scalable and trustworthy. And then, of course, what you want to do then is you want to tie your requirements to your project plans to help you marshal the resources to optimize development schedules. Of course, you want to tie it to other things like other requirements or functions or logical elements or physical parts or manufacturing processes, the list goes on. Once you put these links in place, then you begin to gather some of the real benefit that you see downstream is to be able to understand the impact of a change. So, for example, if a requirement changes, today in many organizations, you're really not sure where it goes. But once you have one of these, the requirements captured and related to the various elements inside of PLM, inside Teamcenter, then now you can pull the string and see all the things that are impacted downstream as a result of a potential change. There's an integrated suspicion management capability to help you manage the fact of the analysis that needs to take place to understand what the global or total impact of a change is all about. Now, it works both directions. Not only does it work downstream if a requirement changes, but it also works the other direction. So, for example, if I have a manufacturing process that needs to change for some reason, I can walk backwards up the chains to see which requirements are potentially impacted, which program schedules or milestones are affected by it, and so forth. And then, of course, lastly, of course, we're after doing their validation and planning. Often in organizations, this doesn't take place till the end, which is why your test and validation stuff is usually on the critical path. We're proposing that this enables a different way of thinking about this problem. I can start my validation as soon as I get the requirements captured and start moving them through the process early in the life cycle. So we're essentially enabling this continuous verification process. So I'm continuously trying to find out through my verification simulations and otherwise how compliant I am to my requirement. And of course, you have the ability to participate in workflows, change, variation, all the other kinds of things you need to care about as a standard product development process. So with this requirement-driven design, you can be sure that your product design decisions are aligned with the original intent of the product effort all along the process to ensure you're compliant to customer requirements and specifications and industry regulations. So the Teamcenter requirement management software helps you to capture and maintain and share these requirements from a centralized location, helping you to ensure that everybody across the entire organization and your supply chain has access to the latest and most accurate information. As changes are incorporated, you can easily compare different versions of the requirements with the documents and specifications and highlight the differences. And with the requirements managed alongside the rest of your product data, you can now tie these requirements to the implementation by allocating these requirements to various multi-domain design, for example, from functions and from functions to the things performing those functions down to the manufacturing process and program schedules and so forth. This helps you ensure that your implementation constantly, consistently, continuously meets the customer's requirements, as well as ensure that you have the resources to address these highest priority projects. And finally, the centralized source of these requirements linked to the implementation will help you verify these designs all along the way. And the functional areas of your company, such as QA, can now actually get some visibility into what's coming, how their verification procedures and test cases and so forth actually map to the customer's requirements, and you can see where you're at and reduce your probability of having a surprise. So with that, I'll wrap it up. And we'll open it up for any Q&A. I'll send it back to you, Jay.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Mark.